The sun fell heavy over the plains of northern Texas, staining the dry fields with a dirty gold. Harland McGraw watched the horizon from the porch window, his felt hat resting on his knees and a sweating glass of iced tea between his fingers. It was late September, but the heat still behaved like midsummer. Everything there seemed to refuse to die, except Martha. Inside the house, the ticking of the wall clock was the only constant sound, aside from the occasional clink of Luciana's spoon against porcelain as she prepared the porridge. She worked in silence, as always, discreet, precise, invisible. Martha sat in the rocking chair, her eyes fixed on a non-existent point on the ceiling. The Alzheimer's advanced like a stain on the soul, consuming what was left of the woman who years ago ruled that house with a firm hand and loud voice. Harland looked at her the way one looks at an abandoned house, with respect, sadness, and a shadow of guilt. Luciana had come from Mexico 3 years ago. A trained nurse, she cared for the elderly in wealthy homes, always as if she didn't exist, as if silence were part of the uniform. Harland had noticed this even before learning her name. She occupied space without occupying space, and somehow that unsettled him more than any showy beauty could. What began as mutual discretion slowly shifted into something else. A bond formed, subtle, unspoken, but steady. Not flirtation, not transgression. A shared understanding born from quiet moments, from compassion, from two lives suspended in the space between duty and longing. "Will you want dinner now or later?" she asked from the kitchen without looking at him. "Later, Luciana." "Thank you," he replied, realizing his voice sounded less firm than he liked. Sometimes when Martha slept, Luciana would sing softly while clearing the silverware. Old Spanish songs, sweet and distant. Harland never asked what they meant, but he listened, and on those nights he didn't go to the bedroom. He stayed there, on the porch chair, listening to the music coming from the kitchen, feeling that the house, that life, still breathed somewhere. That particular night, Martha fell asleep early. Luciana closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and as she left the room, she slightly tripped on a folded rug. "Sorry," she said, and Harland stood up without thinking. "You okay?" he asked, his voice closer than it should have been. She nodded, without smiling. But her eyes lingered a second longer on his, a second that doesn't belong to nurses or to employers or to the morals of a small town. Harland cleared his throat, sat back down. Luciana walked down the hall, but before disappearing, she said something barely audible. "Good night, Mr. Harland." He didn't reply. He just looked at the door closing behind her. And in that end-of-day silence, the sound that remained was memory, or what begins before it even has a name. The next morning, Harland would call his lawyer and ask to revise the will. Harland arrived at the lawyer's office just after 11, but his mind was still back in the hallway, in that glance Luciana gave him, in the second of stillness that said too much. The town of Wimberley was small, and its memories long. Changing a will in such a place was not a quiet gesture. Ronald Keating's office smelled of old paper and bitter coffee. A framed verse from the Bible hung behind his desk. Proverbs, probably. Harland didn't read it. His eyes stayed on the window, where the light didn't quite reach the floor. "Morning, Harland," Ronald said. "You mentioned something urgent." "I need to make a change to the will," Harland replied. "Something. Modest, but necessary." Ronald didn't ask why, not at first. He only took out the folder, the pen, the calm professionalism of someone used to secrets. "Who is she?" he finally asked. Harland's lips pressed into a line. "Luciana Morales. She's the nurse caring for Martha." Ronald tilted his head slightly, reading the name as he wrote it. "I see." There was no comment, but there was understanding, the kind shared between men who've lived too long in silence. "I'm not leaving her the ranch, not the money, just something that matters. A gesture." Ronald nodded. "You'll want that to be unambiguous. Quiet but solid." Harland nodded. The lawyer continued his notes. As the documents were prepared, Harland felt the weight of 100 eyes, not in the office, but back in town, in the whispers of church pews and grocery aisles. He wasn't protecting Luciana from scandal. He was protecting the truth, that something honest could begin even in the shadow of something broken. When he returned home, Luciana was on the porch, watering Martha's favourite potted roses. She looked up briefly, smiled, a tired, quiet smile, then returned to the plants. Harland stood still for a moment, then went inside. It wasn't love. not yet. But it was no longer silence. Martha passed on a Thursday morning, just before dawn. The nurse from hospice had been called in the previous evening, and by the time the first light cut through the kitchen window, Luciana was sitting at her bedside, holding her hand. Harlan stood by the door. He hadn't cried. Not when the breathing slowed, not when the silence grew complete. He felt something deeper than sadness, a kind of stillness that frightened him. After the mortuary left and the bedroom was once again just a room, Harlan sat outside with a coffee gone cold, watching Luciana gather Martha's dresses into boxes. She folded each one carefully as if memory lived in the fabric. The house felt lighter, not free, just untethered, as if it were waiting to learn how to breathe again. In the following days, the house was filled with casseroles and condolences. Neighbours passed through like shadows, hugging too hard and saying too little. Everyone looked at Luciana kindly, but not equally. She was thanked for her care, praised for her patience, but there was a distance. She belonged to the house, but not to them. After the funeral, Harlan invited only Luciana to sit with him on the back porch. No words were exchanged for a long time. Just the sound of crickets and the soft groan of wood settling into dusk. That night Harlan cooked dinner. It was simple: grilled chicken, beans, cornbread. He hadn't done it in years. Luciana sat across from him, her hair tied back, hands folded politely. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. It felt right. "I didn't want us eating separately tonight." There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Luciana met his eyes. "I won't stay long. After the funeral, I'll go." Harlan set down his fork. "You don't have to!" "I know," she replied gently, "but I should." The space between them was filled with everything they hadn't said, all the glances, all the quiet songs, all the nights of not touching, not confessing, not needing to. But now the silence was gone, and something else waited to take its place. Harlan stood and walked to the window. "Luciana," he said, not turning around, "I never asked you for anything, but I'm asking now. Don't leave. Not yet." She didn't answer right away. She just watched him. The lines in his back, the heaviness in his voice. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "Then I won't." Later that night, as the wind rattled the porch screen and the night deepened into something close to silence, Harlan stood alone in the kitchen, washing 2 plates. Luciana had gone to her room. The door had closed softly, but not completely. He didn't look toward it, but he didn't turn off the light either. In the days that followed, Harlan and Luciana moved through the house like 2 figures in a painting neither of them had signed. They spoke little, ate together quietly, and kept to their routines. But the air had changed, not heavy, not light, just aware. Luciana began sleeping later, walking barefoot into the kitchen in the morning with her hair undone, her voice softer. Harlan noticed, but didn't speak of it. He only set her coffee down across from his, always at the same time. They didn't talk about the door that no longer closed all the way, nor the sound of footsteps in the hallway late at night that neither of them pretended not to hear. One afternoon a knock came at the door. It was Harlan's oldest son, Nathan, tall, bitter and impatient, wearing a tucked-in shirt and a face full of disapproval. "Came to pick up a few things of Mom's," he said without looking at Luciana. She stepped aside, but not far. Harlan remained seated, hands folded over the armrest of the chair. Nathan's eyes scanned the room, then narrowed. "She's still here?" he asked. Harlan nodded. "She is. Is she staying?" Harlan didn't answer. Not with words. Nathan set his jaw. "People talk." Harlan looked up. "They always have." Nathan didn't stay long. He left with 2 boxes, a grim expression, and no goodbye to Luciana. She watched his truck disappear down the long dirt road, then returned to the sink without a word. That night, Luciana didn't sing. She sat on the porch while Harlan watered the grass. Neither of them said what needed to be said, but the door stayed unlocked, and the kitchen light remained on. The next morning, Harlan asked if she'd join him for a drive. They rode in silence along the back roads, past cattle fences and cotton fields, old barns tilting under the weight of years. He parked near the edge of the property, under the shadow of a pecan tree that Martha had once called her favourite spot. There was a small bench there, overgrown but still sturdy. Harlan cleared the brush, sat beside Luciana. He didn't touch her, just looked out at the land. "I never knew how to be alone," he said. Luciana didn't respond immediately. Her eyes followed a hawk gliding across the sky. "You're not," she said simply. When they returned home, a letter was waiting in the mailbox. Legal stationery, stamped. Harlan didn't open it. He placed it face down on the kitchen counter. That night, as Luciana cleared the dishes, Harlan stood beside her and dried them one by one. Close, but not touching. "I don't expect you to stay forever," he said. She turned toward him, the dish towel still in her hands. "I haven't thought about forever," she replied. "Just tomorrow." He nodded. Tomorrow, then. It was the kind of envelope that made the kitchen feel colder just by sitting on the counter. Harlan hadn't opened it, but he knew its tone. Legal ink. Family signatures. The sound of inheritance turning into accusation. On Sunday morning, after Luciana had gone to the market, he sat at the table and finally tore it open. It was a formal objection, unsigned but clearly orchestrated by Nathan, a challenge to the amendment in Harlan's will. It cited influence, vulnerability, emotional manipulation, words crafted to sound professional but reeking of resentment. He folded the letter carefully and set it back down. Then he stood and walked out to the barn. The heat had returned, dry and pressing. In the corner of the barn, he found Martha's old cedar chest. Inside were photo albums, faded linens, a lace shawl still scented faintly of lavender. He brought it back inside and left it on Luciana's bed. When she returned, she found him on the porch, hat tilted low. "I left something for you," he said. She didn't ask what, just nodded. That evening, after dinner, Luciana brought out the shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the porch, the last light of the day catching the curve of her face. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "I know." She stepped outside and sat across from him. "What happens now?" Harlan didn't answer immediately. The sky was turning lavender. "Now we wait," he said. "Let them say what they want. Let the lawyers argue. This place, this house, it's quiet because of you, not despite you." She looked away, tears held in place. "You never touched me," she said, "all this time. I know, and still they think I stole something. They don't understand what they've never seen." The wind picked up. The porch creaked. Luciana didn't go to her room that night, and for the first time, Harlan didn't sleep in his chair. The days grew longer, warmer. Bluebonnets lined the roadside, and cicadas returned to the trees like a memory that couldn't be shaken. The house no longer felt like a place of waiting, but of adjusting. Every drawer Luciana opened, every room she entered, bore traces of someone else's history, yet none of it resisted her presence. Harlan stopped pretending he was just grateful. Gratitude had been his mask. What he felt now had roots. It had weight. And it came with the quiet ache of knowing it could still be taken from him. The neighbours kept their distance. No more casseroles, no more visits. The silence from town was louder than gossip. Luciana never mentioned it, but Harlan saw it in the way she started double-checking the locks at night. One afternoon, Harlan drove into town. He stopped at the hardware store, then the florist. When he returned, he found Luciana on the back porch, sewing a tear in one of his old shirts. "I got something," he said, placing the bag beside her. She opened it to find a set of soft porch lights, warm, golden, old-fashioned. "For the evenings," he said. "Thought you might like them." She looked at the lights, then at him. "I do." That night, they hung the lights together. She climbed the ladder. He held it steady. Their laughter was soft, infrequent, but real. When they were done, they sat beneath the glow, two figures no longer blurred. Luciana rested her head on his shoulder. "You didn't have to make this feel like home," she whispered. "I didn't," he replied. "You did." The next morning, another letter arrived, this one official, a court date. The will dispute was moving forward. Luciana placed the envelope on the table and left it there. "What are you going to do?" she asked that night. Harlan thought for a long time. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said, "even if no one believes it." Luciana nodded, and then, finally, they kissed. Not out of impulse, not out of rebellion, but because it was the only thing left to say. The porch light stayed on all night, and no one closed the door. The courthouse in Wimberley was small, a sandstone building with creaking floors and pew-like benches that made the trial feel more like a sermon. Harlan wore his best suit, the same one from Martha's funeral. Luciana sat quietly behind him, a muted blue dress, her hands folded in her lap. Nathan was there, arms crossed, jaw tight. His lawyer spoke with precision and calm disdain, painting a picture of an aging man swayed by a woman in his house, vulnerable and manipulated. The narrative was familiar, almost rehearsed, the immigrant nurse who inserted herself into the life of a grieving family, who took advantage of proximity and frailty. Harland listened. He didn't flinch. Luciana kept her eyes low during the accusations, but her shoulders remained straight. When it was his turn to speak, Harland stood slowly and walked to the front. "I didn't change my will because I was in love," he said. "I changed it because I was seen, heard, cared for, not in grand gestures, not with seduction, but with silence, the kind that stays when everyone else walks away." He looked briefly toward Luciana, then back at the judge. "She didn't ask for anything, but she gave back this house its breath. That's why I left her something. Not out of passion, out of clarity." He paused, then added more quietly, "When my wife stopped recognizing me, Luciana did. And in a world full of noise, that kind of presence, it's rare. I don't regret what I gave her. I regret not doing it sooner." There were murmurs, shuffling. The judge requested a recess. Outside, Luciana and Harland stood in the courtyard, away from the others. She touched his arm lightly. "You didn't have to defend me like that," she said. "I didn't," he answered. "I defended the truth." They sat on a bench shaded by an old oak, silence stretching between them like fabric being folded. Luciana watched a pair of sparrows land on the railing. "My father used to say," she murmured, "when birds come close, it means something pure is nearby." Harland smiled faintly. "Then we must be doing something right." They didn't win the case that day. The proceedings would continue. But as they walked back to the truck, the space between them felt light, not victorious, just whole. On the drive home, they passed the church where Martha had been eulogized. The marquee out front read, "Blessed are the pure in heart." Neither of them said a word. When they got home, the porch light turned on automatically, and for the first time in months, Luciana hummed while she cooked. 2 weeks later, the final decision arrived, in a plain envelope. No stamps, just a signature. Harland opened it at the kitchen table while Luciana watered the garden. They lost. The court had ruled in favour of the family, voiding the amendment to the will. The letter used words like undue influence, emotional dependency, non-consanguineous beneficiary. Cold terms, legal armour wrapped around fear and pride. Harland folded the paper slowly and placed it on the table, then looked out the window. Luciana was crouched near the roses, gently brushing soil from her hands. He walked outside and sat beside her. "We lost," he said. Luciana didn't stop what she was doing. "I know," she said softly. "I felt it this morning." Harland nodded. "It doesn't change anything." She looked at him now. "It changes everything, just not us." They sat in silence, the wind passing between them like something that understood. That night, Harland called Nathan. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. No yelling, no bargaining, just an ending. Later, he retrieved a second envelope from his desk drawer, one he had written weeks earlier, a letter to Luciana. He gave it to her without a word. Inside, she read, "This house was never mine to give. It was always waiting for someone who would love it for what it was, not what it proved. Stay here, as long as it's home. I want nothing more." She folded the letter, tears barely held back. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I know." The next morning, Luciana found Harland on the back porch, tracing the edge of a plat map. "What's that?" she asked. "Just land," he said. "But it's mine, and it's not in the will," she smiled. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking maybe we build something smaller. Something ours." Luciana looked out across the fields where the sun was rising over the same fences, same sky, but a different day. "Yes," she said. "Let's." Over the next days, Harland walking the land in the early morning, measuring steps with a tape and a stick, imagining rooms in the dirt. Luciana joined him after breakfast with coffee in thermoses and notebooks filled with sketches. They planned slowly. A kitchen with light from the east, a porch wide enough for silence, 2 chairs, 1 bedroom, no stairs, nothing extravagant, just permanence. Sometimes they disagreed. She wanted a window near the sink. He wanted the garden in view of the living room. They argued in murmurs, then compromised in glances, each choice a gesture of shared vision. On Sundays, they returned to the original house, tending the yard, checking windows. Harland no longer feared the silence of that place. It had become a shell, a museum of what was. The new land, raw and waiting, breathed something else. At night, they sat by the fireplace in Harlan's study, now cluttered with maps and catalogues. Luciana read aloud from old books, her voice curling through the air like smoke. Harlan listened with eyes closed, not needing to see her to know she belonged. The town kept quiet, or maybe just tired. The scandal lost heat. Nathan sold his share of the land. No one came around. And on one late spring afternoon, as Luciana pressed the first wooden stake into the earth where the new home would rise, she looked back at Harlan, his sleeves rolled, his hands deep in the soil. It wasn't justice, it wasn't reward, but it was something better than peace. It was shared ground. The first beams of summer spread across the pasture, and with them came the sounds of change, low hums of a rented tractor, the crack of wood, the measured voices of two people not in a hurry. Luciana and Harlan worked as if the world around them had gone still, as if this patch of land was the last quiet place on earth. Every morning began the same. Coffee on the hood of the truck, a short list scribbled in Luciana's handwriting. Harlan reading it aloud like scripture. Post holes, level the west corner, paint the beams. Don't forget the hummingbird feeder, she'd add. The house rose slowly. Not from money, but effort. Neighbours passed by and didn't stop. They watched from windows, from tractors, from across fences. No one offered help. None was asked. Luciana painted in the afternoons, her hands speckled with white, her hair tied back with one of Martha's old scarves. Harlan built the porch with hands that had once only directed others. He made mistakes. She corrected gently. At night, they returned to the old house, too tired to talk. They showered in silence, ate simply, sat close. On one of those nights, a package arrived, left without a knock. Inside was a framed photograph, the original farmhouse taken in the 1950s. On the back, scribbled in Nathan's handwriting, "Do what you want with this. It was never mine." Luciana placed it on the mantel. As the frame of the new home took shape, so did the sense of time shifting. Luciana began receiving letters from her sister in Mexico, asking if she was staying, asking if she was safe. Harlan answered one of them himself. She is safe. And this place is hers if she wants it. Luciana cried when she read it, alone. By mid-July, the walls stood. The roof beams cast long shadows across the earth. Harlan kept a small notebook of things he'd never built before, thresholds, eaves, the frame of a future bedroom window. One evening, they stood inside what would be the living room. No walls yet, just stakes, outlines, and twilight. Luciana reached out, took his hand. "This will never be a house with history," she said. "Only one with memory." Harlan squeezed her hand. "That's the only kind that matters." They stayed like that for a while, listening to the sounds of crickets, the echo of things not yet said, and the pulse of a new place growing up around them. Outside, the porch light on the old house flickered for a moment, then went dark. And neither of them looked back. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more narratives that explore the silences between people, the weight of moral choices, and the beauty found in quiet acts of love. New chapters come often, and each one starts with a single decision.